Okay, thank you for that reminder. And now, third time trying to share my screen. Yeah, there we go. Okay, I thought it'd be fun to go over these phrases we looked at the other day. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but it's just kind of fun. You might want to know, well, how do you pronounce that? So just from the top, the word for yes is pronounced Ken. Ken, just like the man's name, Ken. Ken. No in Hebrew is lo. Lo, yeah. Like the opposite of high, low. And that's just exactly how it sounds. Now, please is a little more complicated one. Bevakasha. Bevakasha. Notice I have this bolded on the last part because that's where the accent goes. Most Hebrew words, not all of them, but most of them get accented on the last syllable. So bevakasha. That's a good word to know. Okay. Means please. And the next word is also really good to know. And there's two forms of it. Just the simple thank you is toda. Toda. Again, it's accented on the last syllable, toda. And if you want to say thank you very much, you add to it rabba. Toda rabba. Now, the R sound is complicated in different languages. Almost no one pronounces the letter R the way we do in America. When foreigners are trying to speak American English, they have a real struggle with the American R. Even the British don't pronounce it like we do. So you'd think that they would know how to speak English, but some languages, like Spanish. Lots of us are familiar with Spanish. Trill the R kind of at the tip of the tongue. The Hebrew R is pronounced more towards the back of the throat. It's a ra, 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 back towards the soft palate. And sometimes it's even trilled back there kind of by vibrating the uvula, ra, ra, like that. So very carefully pronounced as thank you very much would be toda rabba, like that. Or just toda rabba, ra, ra, toda rabba. Now, if you say toda rabba, nobody's going to fault you for that. They'll just say, okay, there's an American trying to say pronounced Hebrew, and we appreciate they're trying to pronounce our language. But the Hebrew R is a little bit unique. It's a little bit like a French R. The French pronounce the R back towards the back of the throat also. So toda rabba. You're welcome is just like please. Same word. Bevakasha. Bevakasha. We have shalom. Word most of you know. Again, accented on the last syllable. It's not shalom, it's shalom. Unless it's in poetry or a song, and sometimes there are variations for those. We may learn another Hebrew song that uses shalom, and it ends up being pronounced shalom. But we'll see if we get there. Okay, good morning is boker tov. There's another R in there. Boker tov. Let's try it together. Boker tov. Yeah, that's one you'll say a lot. So we'll be getting up early every morning to go touring, and so we can greet one another with Boker tov. Boker tov. Good afternoon is the same as hello and goodbye. It's shalom. So that's a kind of an all-purpose word. A little bit like the Hawaiian. What do they say?
Aloha.
Aloha, yeah. So it's a lot like that. Okay, good evening is Erev Tov. Erev Tov. There's that Hebrew R again. Erev Tov. Yeah. Erev means evening. If you're wondering, the word Tov means good. That's why it shows up in Boker Tov. It shows up in Erev Tov, and we'll see it in some other places. Just Tov by itself just means good. Somebody asks you, how are you today? You can just say Tov. I think that's down in here too. The next one is Laila Tov. Laila Tov is good night. That's night good. Laila. Laila. is the word for night. See you later is lehitraot. Lehitraot. There's that Hebrew R in there again. It's lehitra. You see this little raised E here? So linguistically, that's known as a schwa. Schwa. It's actually the name of the Hebrew letter. The Hebrew letter is shava. It's a half vowel. It's a hurriedly pronounced vowel. You almost don't hear it. So it's not lehitraot. It's lehitraot. Lehitraot. Try saying that one with me. Lehitraot. Yeah. Okay. See you later. Lehitraot. Okay. How are you to a woman is ma shlomech. Okay. In the song we just sang from Psalm 133:1 has the word ma in it. Hine ma tov. Ma means how. So ma shlomech is literally how is your peace? This is the word shalom right in here. So how is your peace? That's you say, how are you? And to a man, you'd say, ma shlomcha. So both of these have this CH. That's another kind of unique sound in Hebrew that we don't have in English. So like the R sound, it's pronounced towards the back of the throat on that soft palate. And it's aspirate, but it's not like a full. It's a so it vibrates that soft palate. So ma shlomech, ma shlomcha. So there are a lot of Hebrew words with the ch sound in it. In fact, there are two different letters in the Hebrew alphabet that make that sound. Okay, I'm not going to dwell on that because this isn't really a class in Hebrew, but just to give you a few pointers on how to pronounce these words. Here's the word tov, good. It can also mean well. So if somebody asks you ma shlomech or ma shlomcha, you can reply tov. And if you want to sound really good, it's tov. Now listen to it. Tov me'od. Tov me'od. Yeah, me'od, with the accent on the od part. Tov me'od. Say that with me. Tov me'od. Good. Very well, thank you. You can put those together. Tov me'od, todah. Okay, so we have todah up there earlier. Here's this other word we had in our song, na'im. Na'im, pleasant. So if you say, I'm glad to meet you, it's na'im me'od. Literally, it's very pleasant. Okay, or it's very nice. Okay, but pleased to meet you. Na'im me'od. Okay, do you speak English? Good one to know. Okay, so ata medaber anglit. Ata, repeat that with me. Ata medaber
Anglit.
English, you should be able to ask them in English. You can speak English.
Well, and 90% of the people that you'll meet over there can speak some English. So it's taught in all their schools.
How do you say I'm American?
Ani Amerikit. Yeah. Amerikit.
They can probably tell by looking at us.
Yeah. Now, if you ask a woman, it's at medaberet anglit.
With that A.
At medaberet anglit. Okay, say after me. At medaberet
Mered
anglit.
Aglit.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, here's I'm lost.
Now I'm ready.
Hopefully you don't have to use that one. But ne'evadati. Ne'evadati. It's all one word. Ne'evadati. Ne'evadati.
So is the apostrophe always a break?
No, the apostrophe is one of two letters in the Hebrew alphabet that oftentimes they're taught as being silent letters. They're not really silent. Consonants all sounds are made up of consonants and vowels. Basically, consonants are the restriction or stoppage of breath. Vowels are the flow of breath. Okay, so in English we have A, E, I, O, U. A, E, I, O, U. The breath is flowing. But we have consonants like the letter B is B. What you do is you press your lips together and stop it. B. The letter K stops the breath, but it stops it further back in the mouth on your hard palate. The letter T stops the breath at your teeth. Now, here's the challenge. You get these two letters in Hebrew. They stop the breath down in the throat. Okay. And they're called laryngeals. There are two of them. There's Aleph and there is Ayin. So do this. Think about the word open. O-P-E-N. Open, like you open the door. Okay. Now, on the count of three, we're going to say it together, but I want you to do something. Think about what's happening down in your throat here, just when you start to pronounce the O, okay? 1, 2, 3, O. You feel your throat close and then open? Try it one more time on the count of three. 1, 2, 3, O. So that closing and opening of your throat is actually a consonant, and the Hebrew alphabet has two letters to represent that, Aleph and Ayin. And when you see these apostrophes in these words, that's to represent one of those two letters. Okay. And the apostrophe facing one direction is one of them. The apostrophe facing the opposite direction is the other one. That's how you tell the difference. Okay. Thank you for asking that question. Okay. So where is something? A faux. A faux. So the bus is autobus. Autobus. So where's the bus? A faux autobus. Telephone. That's telephone is a telephone. That's an easy one. The bathroom. Ha'ambatya. Now, when you want to find the bathroom, don't say Eifo ha'ambatya, because in Israel, the bathroom is the place where the bathtub is. Okay. What you're looking for is the toilet, and I think we have that on here.
It's right afterwards, at the top.
At the top. Okay.
On the next page. Right after
No,
bathroom.
keep going all the way up. It's
Skips it. Yeah.
I skipped it.
You're in yours, so yeah, ours have it right after that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. I've got to let somebody in. Hold on a second.
You want to go on there?
Okay. Laura has just joined in. Good to see you, Laura. Okay. Okay. So let's see what else we got. A toilet. A toilet is the toilet.
It's very similar. Actually.
So did I leave it off of my sheet?
It's on ours.
It's on yours, but
Right
it's not
on the
on mine.
bathroom on ours.
Okay. All right. Well, you're privileged. The American Embassy, you won't need to do that, but we do have a nice new embassy in Jerusalem, and we'll see if we
These are
can
there.
stop by and see it. One of our tours, we got to stop by there just shortly after it opened. It was a real treat. So, yeah, Hashigri root. Shigri root is the word for embassy. The ha on the front of a word is just the article the. So Shigri root means an embassy. Hashigri root is the embassy. And you'll see some other words like this. Ha'ambatya, ha'telefon. Those all have a the on the front of them. Yamin or yamina means right, like your right hand, as opposed to your left hand. This isn't right as opposed to wrong. It's right as opposed to left. Yamin or yamina, and there's a masculine and a feminine way of saying it. And left is smole or smola. Smole, smola. So as we're going places in the bus, you might hear the tour guide telling the bus driver, Yamina or Smole. You hear that a lot. Okay. Here's call the police. Kara means call. Kara lamishhtara.
When you have feminine and masculine on right and left, Is that depending on who you're speaking to? Or
It's an adjective, so it depends on what noun you're describing.
so if you're telling the bus driver to go to the right,
Yeah, it depends. It's to the right on the turn to the right, probably like on the right-hand turn. It's just describing either turn, the noun turn, or the noun street. So
okay. And if you were saying the store is on the right, you'd have to know that.
yeah,
You'd have
But
to
if
know
you
what
got
the
it wrong,
feminine
everybody-
or ma-
yeah. If you
ma-
got it wrong, people would just say, "Well,
all stores
somebody used
must be different, right?
probably." I'm not sure about that one. Yeah. And then we've got the numbers. Okay. So zero, FS is 0. No, Echad, feminine Achat. That's the number 1. Now, in the song we sang from Psalm 133, we had Yachad, which is unity, which is related to this Echad. Okay, there's that CH sound. Echad. Also in the great Shema from Deuteronomy 6:4. Shema Yisrael, Yahweh Eloheinu, Yahweh Echad. And so the Lord is one, Yahweh is one. That's this word Echad. Curiously, is also used in Genesis of the husband, the man will leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall be Echad, one flesh. So there is a duality and a unity. And in God, we know there is a triunity. So Yahweh is Echad. Within that unity of the Godhead, there are 3 persons, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And the word Echad allows for that. We see that in the way he describes the husband and wife being Echad. Okay, so I'll just run down through these quickly, and I'll just do the masculines. But Shnayim, Shlosha, Arba'a, Chamisha, Shisha, Shiva, Shmona, Tisha, and then Asara. So that's 1 through 10. So if you want to practice that, you are certainly welcome to do that. Okay.
It's interesting that 7, Shiva, is a pretty popular word we hear. Our
Yeah.
God is 7.
Okay, so Shiva is also the name of a Hindu deity. So if you know people that are really into Hinduism or the New Age movement and stuff, they might be talking about that. But it's also a Hebrew word for 7, which is the number of perfection.
I
So,
would have thought it was Shabbat or
Shabbat is the ordinal form of it, which means 7th. So Shabbat is the 7th day.
okay.
So Shabbat is short for Shabbat Yom,
Okay.
7th day. And it comes from Sheva or Shiva. Yeah. Okay, that's enough of that. We got other stuff to get to tonight. Okay, any other questions? I had some videos I wanted to show you last week, and I started showing one, and people that were online couldn't hear. So I figured out how to do this. So I want to show you. I've got 3 of them. They're all fairly short, but let me go and bring up this other share. Okay, these are all pretty good, dealing with the geography of the land of Israel.
We're not hearing the sound or seeing the picture.
Hold on a second. Somebody said they're not hearing it
Or seeing it.
or seeing it.
I was able to find it on YouTube.
I think
There he is. That's
the
a good
better.
amount of time.
There it is.
I met with Ronnie Cohen. He's been a tour guide in Israel for many, many years and has a deep knowledge of the land he calls home.
Okay, basically, somebody gets on a plane, they come to Israel, they get on a bus, and they're expecting to see sand dunes and Arabs on camels all over the place. Okay. I think the best way to really talk about the land is talk about physically what the land looks like. This is the Middle East, but it's not like you see on TV like Afghanistan or Iraq. It's a little bit different. First of all, we're not in a continent that's called the Middle East. We're in Asia. Actually, we're in Western Asia along the Mediterranean coast. We're a small nation, about the size of New Jersey. The width of Israel is only 70 miles. You can drive in about 90 minutes. And the length of it is about 230 miles. That's really about it. We're boundaried in the north by Lebanon, the northeast Syria, which is right behind me. Jordan is the longest border that we have, going all the way down south to the Red Sea between us and Egypt. The Red Sea, by the way, is an outlet to the Far East. It was a port that was opened up by King Solomon 3,000 years ago. We connect 3 continents. This is a land bridge. We are a land bridge. This is the cradle of civilization. Because we have a 120-mile coastline, that coastline became a very, very important trade route. At some point, about 2,000 years ago, the Romans will nickname that. We can read about that in Matthew. It talks about the way of the sea, the Via Maris. Every conqueror who came to this land knew that anyone who controlled that route will control commerce. And whoever controls commerce will control money. And whoever has money has power. This is the most fought over piece of real estate in the world.
Israel sits in such a unique location geographically. And that geographic location helps us understand why it's such an important place spiritually.
When Jesus begins his ministry, why in the world did he go to this small fishing village right on the shores of the Sea of Galilee to make that his base of operations for nearly 3 years? There had to be a reason.
I don't know.
First of all, he's a grassroots kind of guy. That's why he stayed away from the big cities. But I think the main reason is, for the 3 years of ministry here, everyone came to him. How did they hear about him? He needed some kind of a communications network. The Via Maris. The Via Maris passed right in front of the town.
To the road.
Merchants, travelers, anyone, either coming down from the north or coming up from the south, would have had to hear about the wonders or even witness the miracles of Christ at Capernaum. That's why everyone knew about him.
When you travel through Israel, and I love traveling the land with my family, it seems like we as a nation, we're always investing in making this place look more beautiful and in planting and, and cultivating what this land has.
Being that this is a land bridge and a land that was always in turmoil because everybody wanted to control the trade routes, there were many wars. And every army that came and attacked, whenever they besieged the city, what they would do is they would chop down all the trees. They needed the wood for making weapons, for siege machines. And then over those thousands of years of warfare, no one's bothered to replenish the trees. So for the last 100 years or so, there's always been Jewish organizations that took care of our own.
The restoration of the land is a deep and important part of our history and identity here. But today, within the country, there is a concern that the next generation is losing touch with that part of our story. It's not clear who will take up the mantle to care for the land.
Thank you for joining us as we provide a spiritual insight of what God...
Okay, that's that one. Okay. There we go. All right, now there's another one. I've got 2 more. Let's this one next.
What's our appetite?
What's that?
I say it gets into it.
Yeah, it does, and you see that it's not necessarily what you think about the land of Israel, because most of the travel logs you see about Israel focus on the desert parts, and there is desert, but there's beautiful lush portions, and it's so politically important, being at that land bridge between 3 continents. So, okay, let me do this one. I think. this one here.
The following is a DW Old Testament production. With any civilization, we must first begin with an overview of the terrain, as the environment played vital roles in how each culture developed. Unlike Egypt, Palestine had little natural protection since it was only a narrow strip of settled territory along the seacoast. It formed a natural highway for merchants, visitors, and invaders moving between the great city-states in Egypt and Mesopotamia. Being mountainous for the most part, it could only support a modest population and could not compete with the massive armies of Mesopotamia and Egypt. However, being an international crossroad, this most likely contributed to the high literary culture found in the Old Testament. Biblical authors seem to have known well the beliefs and writings of other nations. The natural geography of Palestine divides the land into a series of long north-south zones with very easy means of getting across the country from west to east. The four major zones are the coastal plain, with sandy or marshy soil, which stretches from the narrow belt in the north to broad areas in the south. The hill country, or Shephelah, a series of low hills and valleys up from the coastal plain, often good for sheep herding and orchards, and well settled in ancient times. The Central Mountain Range, which runs like a spine down the eastern part of the country, often reaching 2,000 feet in height and sparsely settled in early times. Jerusalem sits on this range. And the Jordan Valley, which is the lowest area on earth and stretches down the whole eastern border. It is broken twice by water, the Lake of Galilee in the north and the Dead Sea in the middle. Just to give you some perspective, the Sea of Galilee is 684 feet below sea level, and the Dead Sea is an amazing 1,290 feet below sea level. These two lakes are connected by the Jordan River, which takes 200 miles to go the 60 miles between them as it wanders in loops. Below the Dead Sea, no river flows, but the valley continues for another 185 miles to the Red Sea. This area is called the Arubah. These north-south zones are broken only by the Esdraelon Valley, stretching across the middle of the country just above Mount Carmel. It's the most fertile farming land, which was heavily populated at all times. Mount Carmel itself sticks out into the Mediterranean Sea, breaking the easy journey up the coastal plain and forcing travelers to pass through near Megiddo. This narrow pass became the center of many battles and has become popularly known as Armageddon. The land can also be divided by four major regions that stretch across its length from east to west. The first is Galilee. This is a mountainous region north of the Esdraelon Valley that gives up to the high mountains of Lebanon. Samaria. This is the middle of the country, and its hilly nature is bordered on the north by the Esdraelon Valley. It formed the heart of the northern kingdom after the time of Solomon. Judah. This is a mixture of the high mountains and dry wilderness area to the east, but on its west is rolling hills and wide plains that produced much of the fruits and vegetables of the land. And finally, the Negev. This is a desert area stretching across the whole southern part of the land and making up more than half of the total area of Palestine. It gradually becomes the Sinai Desert, dividing Palestine from Egypt. Few settlements were made in the Negev. We'll explore each of these areas in more detail as we study the history of biblical Israel.
Okay, well, I like that because it was kind of a review of what we did the first class session. He said Esdraelon, it's Esdraelon, and it's just the alternate name for the valley of Jezreel. So Esdraelon or Jezreel Valley. He also, I don't know if anybody caught it, but he said west to east one time when he meant north to south.
Yeah.
Did you catch that?
Question.
Yeah.
You know, the elevations he had for the Sea of Galilee and the Salton Sea, they seem different than the ones we learned earlier. He had them at
Okay.
640 something for the Sea of Galilee and then
Okay.
12 something.
Good question. Both of those bodies of water fluctuate greatly. Much like here in our area, you know, when it rains, we get reports about how high the Shasta Lake has risen, and they let water out at times, and it goes down. We get drought. You see a lot of bare ground around the edge of Shasta Lake. So both Galilee and the Dead Sea fluctuate really quite a bit. The Dead Sea actually is drying up. It's much lower today than it was 10 years ago. And 10 years ago, it was lower than it was 20 years ago. So it is actually drying up. Now, it won't dry up completely because the north end of the Dead Sea is very, very deep. But the south end is kind of disappearing.
We're going to go down there.
Yes, we will. We will be at the Dead Sea. First hotel we stay in will be on the Dead Sea.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
So is the water going into the Dead Sea drying up?
Well, yeah, that too. There's not as much water flowing down the Jordan River as there was at one time. So you remember when the Israelites entered the Promised Land under Joshua's leadership, they crossed the Jordan River at flood stage, and God stopped up the water so they could walk across on dry ground. Today, you can wade across pretty easily at that spot. And there's two reasons for that. Number one, where the water exits the Sea of Galilee, they've built a dam there for flood control purposes. So they can regulate how much or how little water comes out of the Sea of Galilee. The second reason is because the Jordan River is the border between between Jordan and Israel. And on both sides, you have farmers who are taking water out of the Jordan for irrigation purposes. And that has become a problem. They're trying to deal with that problem. It hasn't been solved yet, but a lot of water is taken out for irrigation that didn't used to in ancient times. So for both of those reasons, the amount of water entering into the Dead Sea is much less than it was. And that's really the main reason why it's drying up. Israel's had two big projects planned that was supposed to replenish the water in the Dead Sea. Back in the 1980s, they had a plan called the Med-Dead project. They were going to pump water out of the Mediterranean up over the Judean mountains and put it into the Dead Sea. And with that tremendous fall, they were going to generate electricity. Sounded like a brilliant solution. How could you lose with that? But the environmentalists said, no, that's going to disturb the wildlife. You can't do that. So that came to an end. More
like California, everything.
Exactly, Rich.
So is the shoreline moving farther away from the hotels?
Yep. Yep, it is. Mm-hmm. So that didn't work. So that lay unsolved for several years. Now they have a plan called the Red Dead project, and that's to bring water up from the Red Sea, from Eilat, and bring it up on the Jordanian side, and then when it gets up by the Dead Sea, to drop it down in, also generate electricity, but also because Israel now has the ability to desalinate, they can take some of that water out and desalinate it for drinking water for the Jordanians, and also for the population down on the Israeli side of the Dead Sea. And so they can use that water for various purposes. Whether they'll get to do that or not, who knows? But then that's got all kinds of political issues too, because they have to deal with the Jordanians, and that can be a mess.
You mentioned, was it the first class that the Jordanians and the Israelis were working on a joint, was it ski?
Yeah, yeah.
They have the positive precedent working together.
Yeah.
Why not down?
Yeah, hopefully that'll work out. Yeah, the immediate concern is they got to get Gaza settled. They're working on that. So we'll just, it's all in God's hands. We'll see what happens. Okay, I have one more short video to show here. So let me go there. This one. Now this guy that does this video, he's Polish. He speaks, good English, but it's got an obvious Polish accent. He's a missionary with the Friends of Israel, and I've met him, not personally face to face, but we've corresponded. He's really a good guy. He's produced a lot of just tremendous videos, but he has this one that I think is good for our purposes. I get there. This is it.
The state of Israel is a really small country. Not only it is small, but it is surrounded by Muslim nations such as Lebanon from the north, Syria from the northeast, Jordan to the east, and Egypt from the southwest. Since Israel announced her independence on May 14, 1948, Israel was at war 16 times with her neighbors. Additionally, almost each day this small country of about 9.5 million people experiences multiple attempts of terror attacks. Fortunately, thanks to Israel police, most of those attacks are detected and stopped. Nevertheless, Israel has a tough neighborhood. You can say it is the only democracy in the Middle East, surrounded by countries that dream to push Israel into the Mediterranean Sea. Of course, both Jews and Muslims claim that the land on which they live is their land. We know this conflict, and it has a very strong religious background. But what if I tell you that Israel is controlling just a fraction of the land promised to them in the Bible? In this episode, we will look at a special promise given to Israel by God and see what it would mean geographically if Israel was to claim that land. But before we do that, please remember to give a like to this video, subscribe to this channel if you haven't done so yet, and leave a comment. I really enjoy reading comments from you, and even though sometimes I don't have time to answer all of them, I try to read them all. So thank you very much for all your comments. With that out of the way, let's start our episode. Just to give you an understanding, the United States is about 448 times bigger than Israel. Israel is approximately 21,937 square kilometers, while the United States is approximately 9,833,517 square kilometers, making the United States 44,726% larger than Israel. So Israel does not have a lot of land. But if we look at the promise God has given to Israel that this nation will possess land from the Nile River to the Euphrates River, then we are looking at the territory of about 2,387,669 square kilometers. Just to give you a perspective, this is as big as the territory of Kazakhstan, which is the 9th biggest country in the world. Have you ever heard of Kazakhstan? I hope you did, because it's a big country. Anyways, let us look closer at this special promise given to Abraham. In Genesis 15:18, we read about a special promise God gives Abraham.
In the same day the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, Unto thy seed have I given this land, from the river of Egypt unto the great river, the river Euphrates.
Two rivers are mentioned in this passage, the Euphrates River and the Nile River. I would like you to remember those two rivers because they are very important in understanding Israel's history. At the mouth of the Euphrates River, the history of Israel begins. It is here, in the ancient city of Ur, Abraham family is called to begin a journey to the Promised Land. In the 12th chapter of Bereshit, the first book of Moses, we read that Abraham and his family left Ur and moved to Haran, from which they have moved to the Promised Land. Just to give you a perspective, this is approximately 3000 BC. The Promised Land is of course the land where today we have the state of Israel. We read that Abraham traveled with his family as far as the great tree of Moreh in Shechem. By the way, this is kinda cool that this tree was so significant that it was some kind of a direction point. Was that a big tree? Was it a weird looking tree? Was it an olive tree or an oak tree? What do you think? Anyway, apparently this tree was so distinct that in Abraham days people knew where this great tree of Shechem was located. We also read that at that time the Canaanites lived there, and so the land was not empty. This is significant because in 1948 the land of Israel was also full of Arab people living there for centuries. Despite that Canaan was not a desert and people are living there, God tells Abraham he will give him this land. In Bereshit 14:14, we read that God makes an even stronger statement saying that this land will be given to Abraham's descendants forever. This promise is repeated again and again to Abraham's son Isaac and to Isaac's son Jacob. This is critical information because some people could say, okay, but Abraham had many sons, for example Ishmael. And so some people would say, yes, the land is promised to Abraham's descendants, and the descendants of Abraham are Arab people. The problem with this approach is that God repeats the same promise to Isaac and then to Jacob. In Bereshit chapter 17, God tells Abraham that his eternal covenant will be established with Isaac and not Ishmael. Actually, if you remember the biblical account, when Isaac is born, Ishmael and his mother needs to leave the tents of Abraham. This is very symbolic. The promise of the land will continue, but only through Isaac. The same can be said about the sons of Isaac. It was Jacob that was the promised one, and not Esau. Even before they were born, God foretells that Jacob is the one that he has chosen, and the younger son Jacob will receive the benefits of the promise given to his grandfather Abraham. And what is astonishing is that Isaac favored the older one, Esau, and if it would be his choice, it would be the stronger brother who would continue the promise. But that was not the plan of God. And so Jacob is the forefather of the nation of Israel. Jacob has 12 sons that become the 12 tribes of Israel. Now, returning to Israel's history, the events experienced by the patriarchs is a microcosm of what will happen to the whole nation. All the three biblical heroes, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, left the promised land and lived in a foreign country. Abraham went to Egypt, where he lied to the Pharaoh about Sarah being his sister. The imminent destruction of the promised land was only prevented because God did not allow it. Next, on his way to Egypt, Isaac was stopped by God in Gerar, the land of Abimelech, king of the Philistines. Like his father, Isaac lied, calling Rebekah his sister and creating envy in the hearts of the Philistines due to his prosperity. This prosperity of Isaac in the foreign land eventually caused that Isaac was forced to leave their land and return to the promised land. Lastly, Jacob left the land twice. First, as a young boy, he escaped from the anger of his brother Esau to live in Padan Aram, located today on the Syrian and Turkish border. This time, Jacob did not deceive, but he was deceived by Laban and suffered envy caused by his prosperity. Eventually, Jacob also leaves Laban in secret fear and hurry. The second time Jacob left the land was as an elder, after which point he never returned. However, on his deathbed, he ordered his sons to bury him in the grave of Abraham and Isaac in the Machpelah cave in Hebron. And so, the cycle of the three patriarchs ended in the land promised by God. And so is the plan for the whole nation of Israel. The two rivers, Nile and Euphrates, become a marking point for Israel's history. Nile is the greatest river of Egypt and the reason why this ancient nation became so powerful. Egypt is a place of exile for Abraham, for Jacob and his 12 sons, and eventually for the whole nation of Israel. However, we must remember that Israel's presence in Egypt is not random, but is foretold by God, who announces in the first book of Moses, the same day that he gives the promise to Abraham, that the new created nation will have to spend there 400 years. The Euphrates River is another great river that contributed to the development of powerful nations such as Babylon and Persia. It is the place where Israel's history began. It is where Abraham was called, and a place where the Jewish people were exiled for 700 years. Now, returning to the original land promise given to Abraham by God, we see why the boundary of the two great rivers were given. At the banks of those two rivers, very important events occurred. First, the Hebrews returned from Egypt after 400 years in exile, and later the Jewish nation returns from Persia after another 70 years in exile. If we take the promise given to Abraham literally, then Israel is promised a much bigger land than she possesses now. From the river Nile to the Euphrates River, we can draw a land of 2,387,669 square kilometers. Now, I know that some people would say that this promise was realized in the times of Solomon. The problem with that is that Solomon never went as far as the Nile River in his land conquests. Besides, his kingdom did not last too long and was quickly divided and shrinked. The second argument is that the promise given to Abraham does not really mean the river Nile, but the Wadi Nile, meaning some smaller creek of the Nile River, and Solomon's kingdom did in fact touch the Euphrates River to the north. The problem with this interpretation is that after the rivers are mentioned, God provides specific territories occupied by different people, and so we have the land of Kenites, Kenizzites, Kedomites, Hittites, Perizzites, Rephathites, Amorites, Canaanites, Gerishites, and Jebusites. Those tribes lived on a territory that went far beyond the land that Solomon possessed. But even if we take the minimalist view that the promised land is the land that Solomon possessed at the height of his reign, then even if we take that view, Israel is still far from possessing such a great land. Others say, well, since Solomon fulfilled the promise, it does not apply today. Besides, today we are all the spiritual offspring of Abraham, so it doesn't matter anyway. There are so many problems with this statement. First of all, God says the land promise is eternal. Eternal means forever, and not just a few years in history during Solomon's reign. So just because Israel possessed the land at some point in history, it does not nullify the eternal promise given to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Second, yes, the New Testament says that Christians are the spiritual sons of Abraham. But, as we discussed, Abraham had many sons, but the land promise was only passed through Isaac and then Jacob. The New Testament does not say that Christians are the spiritual sons of Jacob, does it? And let us remember that the descendants of Jacob are the ones that create the nation of Israel. As you remember, God showed grace to Hagar and her son Ishmael and gave them a special promise. In the same way, Christians can participate in certain blessings due to the spiritual heritage realized through faith, but it does not mean that Christians are the new Israel. Israel is Israel. Christians are Christians. Now, the descendants of Jacob can become Christians, believers in Christ, but Christians can't become Israel if they are not the descendants of Jacob. This is quite simple, but I realize this sometimes creates problems in understanding, and maybe I will make a separate episode about this. Let me know if you would like to hear more about this topic. So, to sum up, Israel does not possess the land promised to them by God. The current state of Israel is just a fraction of the territory promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, even if we take the minimalist view from the Wadi Nile to the Euphrates River as seen in the territories conquered by Solomon. Israel history is connected both with the Nile and Euphrates River. Those rivers are currently on the territories of Egypt and Iran, but Israel has an eternal promise from God that in the future this territory will belong to the chosen nation. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, that's that. Any questions?
It's interesting that the diamond shape that he's calling out for being Israel has two straight lines between to the west sides of the rivers and then to the east sides, but those straight lines cut through oceans too.
Yeah.
So,
I think, in my opinion, David, the other view that he mentioned is probably more accurate. I think the Euphrates is describing a northern boundary, not an eastern boundary, and the Nile River would be describing a southern boundary, not a western boundary. But I may be wrong about that. But he does mention both of those views.
it's also interesting that the land to the east of the Jordan doesn't belong to Israel. I mean, it was Israel's in Bible time.
Yes.
And yet it's not now.
It's not now. That's
disturbing.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And the country of Jordan obviously is not going to give that up to Israel. And the two nations have a peace pact. So Israel is content to wait for the Messiah to come and give them all of the land promised to them. They're thankful they have what they have today, and they want to defend that. But they're not looking to, to conquer Lebanon or Jordan or Egypt. Although those countries are afraid that Israel might try to do that. That's part of the reason for the political tension in that area. But Israel has not tried to get that land unless they've tried to occupy portions of it for security purposes. So they did occupy a part of southern Lebanon for a number of years, and then they gave that up. They, of course, had the Sinai Peninsula for many, many years. They gave that back to Egypt in exchange for peace. And just recently, they have occupied portions of Syria close to their border for security purposes. And it still remains to be seen what's going to happen with that. But the prevailing belief in Israel is that when Messiah comes, they're looking for his coming the first time. We are looking for his coming the second time. But when he comes, Israel is expecting the Messiah to give them all of the Abrahamic land grant.
Thank you.
Yeah, good. Good. Any other questions? Okay, well, we have been at it for an hour and a quarter. So what we're going to do is we're going to take about a 10-minute break. And then we're going to come back and get into the lecture for tonight's session. We go back and survey some of the cities that cities and various places that we'll be visiting on our tour. But let's take a 10-minute break now, and it's 7:13, so we'll come back at 7. What would that be? 23. Okay, 7:23.
Make it the room.
Go to
So
Jerusalem,
sweet.
you gotta stay.
It does.
You got to have them, I know. But did you have a question about Jerusalem?
Beg your pardon?
Did you have a question about staying in Jerusalem?
Yeah. I was just kind of planning my itinerary, but I wanted to do it 3 days.
Oh,
Somebody-
Oh, okay. We had a problem with you kept
Straight north.
So they're close. Thing I could take, and they had to end up paying 20% out of their own pocket. That's still huge. Yeah. And there's people giving all the time for certain. Yeah. You know. Oh, sure. For certain. Yeah, I did that. Yeah. Yeah. I did that ID. Yeah, 'cause I see that coming out.
Very far.
I
like to swim
did
around.
that for Lara. She went to Ireland.
I did it to somebody. Yeah, right. I can't remember. They're like so happy to see each other, like just turn around and
They
documents and different things.
Yeah.
You know, without.
That's so funny.
That's sunny. Yeah. So we thought that was 2 weeks. It's one thing for a weekend. We're gonna be gone next weekend. Okay. Just that first time.
They handed out bracelets and they asked us.
Oh, okay.
I remember that.
Yeah.
Thanks for the thing. And we're like, well, I remember
put the dog bed and the dog food in there, and I just so spoiled. You should be an indoor dog. Where am I go? Yeah, I know, but Shayla has a lot to do with it. But, you know, she'll come over and. Yeah, we'll leave early Saturday morning from that place at 3. And we haven't done that with them for a long time. We tried to get our neighbor to come over to visit at 6 months old. And he was the 3 articles that were everyone walking in there. And so, but I think Shayla, he's been around her and there. Maybe not a dog anymore. I'm gonna, you guys will be next door neighbors. I mean, it's only one night, so it's just.
Yeah.
So you'll be dropping off and then.
So we're gonna get Palestine on Saturday here, so Camper, which is it's a long way, it's still from the Bay Area. And our plan right now, it's kind of a pistol, but our plan is Monday morning early, leaving everything else, drive up to the park station, like, $6 a day, parking, and leave our park there.
I remember
We won't
seeing
take our
her.
car.
Yeah,
They steal it, and we didn't replace that car.
I
Oh, you can take it, yeah.
Which makes it, because it's really good planning for an insurance.
Right, right.
But it's, you know, I think we'll do that, and then, hopefully it'll be okay.
Nobody else.
Yeah.
That's a big question.
Right.
Because we get back,
Yeah.
and so if we go there really early,
There you have.
you know, and then take part to the airport. We have done that one at the time, we parked our car and it's turned into preaching has
Yeah,
most
the
of the
women,
women.
something.
Yeah.
Didn't cover, even if it killed off.
We didn't realize.
Oh, yeah.
There's working situation with, we don't want to ask them to get a car.
Yeah.
And it's only $3 at the long-term parking at ours.
Yeah, I use it at the airport.
Oh, it's so expensive.
Yeah, oh, yeah, it's like, like my friend does.
Well, and Blake, 26 years ago, I parked, I was going to a conference.
My friend does.
It was all paid for by somebody else. I was just thinking, like,
Brother
and
has
I
suggested
let us
he has a
go
van.
to Chicago.
Yeah.
My
He's
car
gonna drive
parked
up to my
There's
house.
a girl in my.
And for, I think, 10 days or whatever.
Well, I think we went off
Like,
doing both.
And so that was.
I would assume,
Anymore.
And,
So we thought,
but it
okay,
wouldn't be
we
6
parked
and
there.
11, so we thought maybe we
It'll
would
take,
just put.
and I think it'll take about an hour apart.
I love God her entire
Well, I
life.
know it's just getting you there.
Yeah, and that's why I think it's like,
And
somebody say you'd want to
argued
live
over
on
it,
yeah.
we went back and forth about.
So as long as it can live there.
She wasn't going anywhere.
2.5 hours. It should be, yeah.
That's
good.
Yeah.
She finally said, I'll make you an eat. You'll come along, I'll
Yeah.
see.
Well, the nice thing is our grocery shop right in there.
I thought on the rain thing.
Yeah, one has to walk
grab,
two.
You can like shuttle your way in somewhere else that.
Right, right. You don't have to do that.
I had to sit behind.
Yeah, so that should be, because we did it before when we flew,
Yeah.
when we flew over.
Yeah.
I was
I
the
don't
only
have
person
the,
there. What a way to make you feel. Welcome.
In 2019.
Yeah.
Yeah, we went to Park, and that's when we tried to Walnut Creek. Yeah. Took part in the course.
Yeah.
Really slick.
Well, that's good then.
Yeah.
Which is why
You're
I
gonna
started
reverse
going
it.
to baptism because
Yeah,
I
But
wanted
the
to
problem
do
is we get
Yeah.
back at 5:30.
Yeah.
So it's delayed.
So we'll
So
all-
they didn't want to go to customs, so I'm thinking we might not get to our car until like 8:30 at night, depending.
Very
I want to drive all the way back at 9.
Well, we're gonna drive
Put
to
it in
Peter.
And
Yeah.
Fury.
Yeah, you guys.
You know, and I kept going.
I mean, it's further for you. Well, I think about the same.
Okay.
To go to Peter, because you have to go down, you're gonna have to go around over and over.
Oh.
And
You don't have to
Yeah,
sit
but I
in
do
that at
know.
all.
So you take one.
And so afterwards, I
Go
said,
right
oh,
over
hey,
to
you got to
the
tell me
where Harrisburg is.
what.
Oh, yeah, so and that's where you
She
start
said, I
off
used to
and
sit
go
there listening to
over
the
to
words,
the
and
past
she said,
the morning.
oh, she got spoke to me in a voice that was awesome.
Okay.
It's about 30 minutes from my
You
place.
love
Okay,
me.
it's not too far.
Not too bad, but those are kind of weird roads. It's not a straight shot aside, you know.
Yeah, we were from the
I,
Bay
she
Area,
said,
so,
you
you
know,
know, we lived in.
it was like,
From us up here now.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
we
don't
lived
like,
when we
so-
were until we were in our early 30s, we lived in Santa Clara and
Oh, okay.
I know that she's got a straight line there. I know she's just that's about.
Yeah, and then in our 30s, we moved to go down.
Then you have.
There's a huge break for the area.
And then they were.
Sorry.
You're all there.
Like,
Yeah.
do we know
And
what
then,
time?
In the last 5 years.
Find
Yeah.
it. Oh, I don't have the link here. I've got it.
So, and so we were engaged.
Or come back. For a year or so, they had a TV ad to come back home.
In Saratoga.
Nice.
But,
It's
I
called
just
Lemire
a
Michelle.
huge.
Yeah,
And I
it's a French
don't,
restaurant in
I
Saratoga.
think there's
Little
people who
restaurant,
want the
very
structure.
nice restaurant.
Yeah. I'll find out.
My friend Lyra,
Okay, that's exciting.
she became an Orthodox
Nice.
something. They meet downtown.
How cool. Yeah,
Below the lady.
I was asking her like, how are you getting down there? I
Yeah.
know.
Like gowns and,
Yeah.
figure that out, you know, because she wanted to.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but they brought her here with the class across Hoxie. And then it's just a weekend.
Yeah.
Oh,
okay.
I mean, just planning on going
my
for
relative
another college.
knowledge
Yeah, well, when I
I
talked
could
to her last year was, but then
pick out,
somebody told me
that's
she'd
not
already
what it
moved
said.
to her daughter's. I said, I don't
No.
think so.
Those
Yeah.
are all This is our part.
Her girl-
240 here.
His wife.
Yeah, I wish they were- she was like,
So,
I said,
It's
"Oh, I don't think
a
so."
good time of day for
Yeah.
meetings.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's gotten really nice.
Yeah.
I think we left around
Yeah.
5:30, something like that.
Yeah.
Got this layover
Yeah,
in Frankfurt.
yeah, oh, good, yeah.
And then I started thinking about,
Way
what you said.
back, we got
Yeah.
Yeah, and you go, anyway, don't worry about
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. Home early.
Loves Lando.
Yeah,
Talking
by the
about
time we get back to here, we'll be
He's
at
really
11 o'clock.
like-
Of course, we'll be on a different
When we land there, they're a little bit tired.
Yeah.
And when we
So,
land here,
But I just added it up.
Then we
And then
have
just
a
a
little layer
ten
of,
hours.
we get into a different plane to go.
But, yeah, it's-
6
Yeah,
p.m.
to have your job, with people.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we'll have
and then-
quite a few hours, yeah, but it's, we just have to kind of cool our heels in the air, not gonna risk going out.
I
flew into
Frankfurt
Oh, did
Now,
you?
he used to get to
Went
play.
into the town,
Yeah.
city, the airport's out
Now
there,
that he's.
and when I was coming back out, I got, their trains are stacked vertical, and I
Or you
was
could-
not
you
realizing I was
could-
at home level. Oh, no,
Yeah.
so I got on the train that I thought was from the airport, and I look up the window, and it's the airport.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, so I had to get off the train, go back to the train station, get on the right. one. Didn't make it in time. Yeah, I did, yeah. But, oh, it's one of those things where you think you got everything figured out.
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
It's like, wow. That'll be nice. So they fly out the Israeli flying Lufthansa. I mean, from Frankfurt to Israel, that's also Lufthansa. Because of both
They know where they want
they're
their,
coming
where they're
back.
gonna get their ears
And they don't want to think they're.
Yeah. So we go back to Frankfurt, coming back.
I'm sleeping.
No, Zurich, coming back at Zurich. Zurich.
Can I be dopey? Want to be dopey?
Okay, it's time for us to get started. Okay, is everybody back? I'm a minute late, so my apologies for that. We got involved in talking. But I won't tell you who to blame. You can blame me. Okay. So let me just fill everybody in on the conversation I was just having, and I'll share this screen also. So about flights. So these are our flights. The first two, let me go like this. Okay, on the top are the flights out. We're going to be flying on Lufthansa. And so this is Lufthansa flight 455, February 23rd. We depart San Francisco at 2:40 p.m. And we're going to fly to Frankfurt. That's the FRA. We'll have a layover there from 10:30 a.m. till 6 p.m. Yeah, it's a pretty long layover. So, yeah, that looks a little longer than that. But at any rate, then we will depart from Frankfurt and fly to Tel Aviv, Israel, and arrive in Tel Aviv at 11:05 p.m. So it'll be almost midnight. And then from there, we'll have a fairly hefty bus ride down to the Dead Sea. So everybody will be zonked out by then anyway, so you won't miss anything if you sleep on the bus, which is probably what's going to happen for everybody. And then we'll get a good night's rest and wake up the next morning, start our tour. On the way back, We're flying.
About how long the bus ride? We're starting.
I think it was about 3 hours. I think it's about 3 hours bus ride.
And we land at 11, so we probably won't even get on the bus until at least 11:30.
Probably.
After that.
Yep.
Well,
Yeah.
isn't
You know, everybody's time is going to be all mixed up
Oh,
anyway.
but-
So just bear in mind that, you know, they're halfway around the world.
Right.
So we're almost 12 hours out of sync.
So
So,
it's 3 hours to the first hotel after
Mhm.
we land? Okay, I didn't.
Yeah.
But then we're not gonna get up bright and early if we go to bed
No.
at 3 a.m.
3 a.m.
no, we'll be gracious to you that first day. We'll probably have a pretty leisurely day that first day.
Okay.
So, we'll be flying back on Swiss Air. And so departing March 8th at 5:20 in the morning.
So how soon do we have to get to the airport? Like 4, 3:30?
On the way back?
Yeah.
Yeah, they'll take us there on the bus. Well, no, but do you have a different flight going on?
Well, I'm gonna go with everybody to the airport
Oh, okay,
and then I'll probably be at the airport for a while before my flight to Greece.
okay. Well, you'll have to.
But yeah,
you'll
I don't
have
want to
to-
stay at the airport at the hotel by myself.
Okay,
so.
yeah. So you'll have to, you'll figure that out when
Yeah,
you get
I'll
all the
figure
flight
that
arrangements made.
But we'll be going from Jerusalem to Tel Aviv. Do you remember
Right.
how long that?
That's what, hour and a half?
So we'll have to, so we would have to,
We're leaving at 2 in the
probably
morning.
leave at 2 in the morning.
Mhm.
How?
Probably leave at 2 in
Probably,
the morning, get
something
there
like
at
that.
3:30.
Yeah.
And have to, or maybe,
Yeah.
maybe
A little bit later.
2:30, 3.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. But you don't have to worry about this until
Yeah.
we get there. And-
You'll bang on our door. if we-
overrated, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, you have a 15-hour flight. You could sleep the whole time.
Yeah.
That's right. There's not even sleep on.
Okay. Anyway, that's the schedule. Flying back on Swiss Air, and our layover is in Zurich from 8:40 a.m. to 1:15 p.m. And we arrive back in San Francisco 5:25 p.m. And then we drive back home. Okay. Now. Oh, I don't want to go here. This is week 3. Okay, here's what we cover now in the remainder of our time together this evening. So these are review questions, and for our students taking this for credit, this is what you want to study for this week's test. And for everybody else, these are just some good things to think about for tonight's lecture. So can you locate Nazareth, Megiddo, and Jerusalem on a map of Israel? If you have those line maps, might be thinking about that. These 3 places especially, Nazareth, Megiddo, and Jerusalem. Number 2, what valley lies below Nazareth to the south? Number 3, Nazareth has existed since what period? Fourthly, how many times is Nazareth referred to in the Old Testament? We think about it as a New Testament city. What about Nazareth in the Old Testament? 5, how large was the population of Nazareth at the time of Christ? Today it's a very, very large city. Number 6, what kind of reputation did Nazareth have at the time of Christ? 7, describe the population of Nazareth today. 8, what valley lies to the east of Megiddo? So we had these first questions all dealing with Nazareth. Now we're switching to Megiddo. Number 9, approximately how many layers of civilization have been excavated at Megiddo? Name some extra biblical records that mention Megiddo. 11, to what tribe was Megiddo allotted? 12, what king of Judah was killed at Megiddo? And explain the etymology of the word Armageddon. We'll talk about that. Then, switching now to Jerusalem. And we're going to deal with Jerusalem tonight. Name the 3 valleys that are associated with Jerusalem. Discuss the location of, quote, Mount Zion, unquote. And that's in quote marks on purpose. So keep that in mind. So discuss the location of Mount Zion at various stages in Jerusalem's history. 16, where is the Mount of Olives located in relation to Jerusalem? 17, what is the principal water source for the city of Jerusalem in biblical times? And where is this water source located? 18, how old are the old city, again in quote marks, the old city walls that stand in Jerusalem today? 19, describe the location of the biblical city of Jerusalem in relation to the, quote, old city, unquote, walls that stand in Jerusalem today. And then lastly, describe the location of the Temple Mount in relation to the old city walls that stand in Jerusalem today. So those are some questions we want to take a look at. And let me see if I can get the, here we go. Okay, so here is our little booklet. Last time I was supposed to stop at Capernaum. We went right past Capernaum and I went to Chorazin, which is north of Capernaum. And we just discussed that. We saw some pictures of Capernaum. Very wonderful, beautiful place. I need to get my PowerPoint up too. Yeah. Okay. So Chorazin, we've done that. I think enough. Gergasa, Gergasa, also known as Kursi, is on the east side of the Sea of Galilee, and it's the site of the healing of the Gergesene demoniac, with those pigs that rushed down into the Sea of Galilee. You've all heard that story. So it's located on the eastern shore of the Sea of Galilee between Susita, Hippos. Susita, Hippos is a city on the east side of the Sea of Galilee. It's up on a tall hill. I think we talked about it before. The Hippos means a horse and in Greek, and Sus is horse in Hebrew. So between Susita and Bethsaida, Bethsaida is up in the north end of the Sea of Galilee. So between those, you have this place called Gergasa or Kursi, the site of the healing of the Gergesene demoniac and the drowning of the pigs in Mark chapter 5. The Gadarenes were residents of Gadara, one of the cities of the Decapolis, and the capital of the Roman province of Perea, which was controlled by Herod Antipas. Gadara, also called Gergasa, Gerasa in various manuscripts, was located on the summit of a mountain 6 miles southeast of the Sea of Galilee, and the miracle could not have taken place at Gadara itself, for between the lake and the town, there is a deep, almost impassable ravine of the Yarmouk River. Remember we talked about the watercourses, the Yarmouk or the Jarmouk River goes right through that area into the Sea of Galilee. So Gadara, which is mentioned in the Gospels, only in connection with the healing of the demon-possessed men, was dominant enough to give its name to the entire area. So the term, the region of the Gadarenes in Matthew's account, Matthew said it happened in that region, not right there where you can't get across the Yarmouk River. So there is the remains at the site of one of the largest known Byzantine monasteries in the Holy Land, measuring 450 by 370 feet. It was discovered in 1970, shortly after the Six-Day War of 1967. And like many archaeological sites, it was discovered during the construction of a road. So what happens in Israel is anytime you put your shovel into the dirt, you're liable to come across something of archaeological significance. And when you do, then all the construction has to stop. And the Antiquities Authority has to be contacted. They have to send their archaeologists out. They have to survey the whole site and then make sure the project can go forward. Sometimes they have to alter the project. They have to maybe reroute the road or build an overpass. All kinds of interesting things take place. But the bulldozers uncovered some pottery shards and tops of monastery stone walls, and then they went on with the excavation. There's a mosaic floor in this monastery with pictures of animals, chickens, geese, doves, cormorants, and fish. Also plants, the citrons. You know what a citron is? It's like a great big lemon. It's a citrus fruit. Dates, pomegranates, and grapes. The mosaic floor in the baptism room has a Greek inscription which translates, "In the name of the most God-beloved Stephanus, the priest and abbot, was made the mosaic of the Photosterion in the month of December 4th, indication in the time of the pious and Christ-beloved our King Mauritius, first consulate." It's kind of a long quote, but that's all written out in Greek in that floor. Okay, chapel was excavated in 1980 on the hill overlooking the monastery, so separate from it a little bit. And there's an apse in that cave where traditionally Jesus met the demoniac. Now, whether that was the actual site or not, we don't know. We know where the miracle took place because there's only one place on the eastern shore of the Sea of Galilee where you have this hillside running right down into the sea, as described in the Gospels. And we'll almost certainly visit that site. And it's not exactly where this monastery is. So, but we'll see that. Mount Arbel is on the west side of the Sea of Galilee. It's one of my favorite sites. And hopefully we get to go up on top of Mount Arbel. Beautiful, beautiful panoramic view of the whole northern part of Israel from the Sea of Galilee on south, and great big, huge cliffs that come down. Let's take a look at some pictures here. This is that Gargasa, the Sea of Galilee down below. You're up here on this higher plane, and these pigs would have rushed down. Now, in biblical times, the Sea of Galilee was actually higher than this. And many of these plains here would have been covered in water. Here's another view of the cliffs coming down to the sea. Now, Mount Arbel, that's over on the left side of this slide. And these cliffs here are filled with caves. During the intertestamental period, just shortly before the New Testament period, there were Jews that were trying to rebel against Herod, and they took refuge in those caves, and Herod lowered soldiers on platforms from above down, and they fired their arrows in those caves and killed many hundreds of Jews that were hiding in these caves. This valley in between here, between this mountain and the mountain on the right, is called the Valley of Doves. And this is the route that you would take if you're going from the Sea of Galilee to Nazareth. And this is a route that no doubt Jesus traveled a number of times. His hometown was Nazareth, Sea of Galilee, Capernaum became his headquarters. And this is a beautiful, there's actually a hiking trail down through here called the Jesus Trail. And hopefully we'll get to see some of that. Another picture of the Arbel Mountain, and the Sea of Galilee is just around the corner of that. And we can go right up on here. And it's quite you can see how high this is, just towering up above.
How do we get up there?
Well, it's a gentle slope on the other side, off to the right.
So you drive up?
You can drive part way up and then
Right.
walk the rest of the way. Yeah.
There's roads up on this map. It shows roads.
Yeah. Can you see Mount Arbel on your map?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it shows roads that
Yeah.
go kind of around
Yeah.
the peak.
So here's some of our tour group up there. Okay, Dan Spring. We're going to come back to this. That was Mount Arbel. Battle was fought between the Hasmoneans and the Bacchides, recorded in 1 Maccabees 9:2. Herod fought the Zealots. That's what I was telling you about, the shooting into the caves. Herod fought the Zealots who hid in the caves above the plain. It's in Josephus' Antiquities, chapter 14. After the destruction of the Second Temple, it was the seat of the priestly family of Yeshua. Okay, so I always look forward to going up on Mount Arbel. It's really a wonderful, wonderful place to visit. Okay, Dan and Caesarea Philippi. For this, we're going all the way up to the northern border, just on the border with Lebanon. And you find the expression in the Old Testament a couple of times, from Dan to Beersheba. So Dan was the furthest north inhabited Israel, and Beersheba was the furthest south that was habitable. South of Beersheba was desert, and people didn't really live there. But from Dan to Beersheba was basically the nation, the country of Israel. That's where everybody lived. Dan is up in the north. Two places. Dan became the capital of the northern kingdom after the kingdom split between Israel and Judah. And well, I should say not the capital, but one of two cultic sites. The other at Bethel. So Bethel and Dan, Jeroboam erected altars with these calves to worship. And one was at Dan. And Dan has been excavated. It's tremendous what you can see there at Dan. There's also at Dan a beautiful, beautiful nature preserve with wonderful hiking trails. And I'll show you some pictures of that in just a moment. And just a little ways to the east of Dan is Caesarea Philippi. Now, again, there are two Caesareas. We talked about one of them, Caesarea. Caesarea Maritima is by the sea. Caesarea Philippi is inland and up at the northern border. That's this one. Caesarea Philippi is also called Banyas and Laish. The Old Testament is known as Laish. The reason it's called that is there was a group of Canaanite peoples that lived in the Canaanite city Laish. Tribe of Dan could not conquer its possession down by Tel Aviv or Jaffa, and so they went up to the north and they took possession of this place called Laish or Laish. Later, what was developed into Caesarea Philippi became, the Greeks turned it into a worship center for the Greek god Pan. Pan was the guy who plays the flute, and he is the god of the grape harvest. And a great temple was built to Pan, and there were all kinds of ceremonies that were held up into New Testament times in this location. And there's quite a significant event that takes place there, recorded in Matthew chapter 16, where Jesus asks his disciples, "Who do men say that I, the Son of Man, am?" And they said, "Well, some say that you're John the Baptist, some think that you're Elijah, some think you're Jeremiah, or maybe one of the prophets." And he says to them, "Well, who do you say that I am?" This is where Peter says, "Well, you're the Christ, the Son of the living God."
And that was in Dan?
That was in Banyas or Pan, Caesarea Philippi. Okay. So there is well, we'll say more about it later. I'll show you some pictures in just a moment. But okay, here we have the description. Located to the far north at the foot of Mount Hermon and the Golan Heights, and at the headwaters of the Jordan River. So the Jordan River begins to form here. Snowmelt from Mount Hermon comes down, comes gushing up out of many, many springs around the foot of the mountain, and begin to flow down into that Syrian African Rift Valley. Yeah.
Like Mount Shasta and the Sacramento River.
Very much like Mount Shasta and the Sacramento. So you have the Jordan River. Remember I said that the tribe of Dan settled in this area. In Hebrew, Yarad means down or to go down. Jordan, or in Hebrew, Yardan is Yarad Dan. It's going down from Dan. And so that's where the Jordan River gets its name. Okay, it's what comes down from where Dan settled. And this is where it's all taking place. There at Banyas, by the way, I mentioned that the Greeks worship the god Pan. The Arabs cannot pronounce the letter P. It comes out as B, like a B. So Pan got corrupted through Arabic into Ban and Banyas. So that's that comes from the Greek god Pan. So there at Banyas, at Caesarea Philippi, is a great cliff. And there's a cave in that cliff. And in biblical times, water gushed out of that cave and became one of the main sources of the Jordan River. Now, like I said, there were many sources. But that was one of the main ones. An earthquake redirected that outflow so that it comes out in front of the cave. But the water in that cave is actually connected to another site further up on Mount Hermon. And there's an interesting story about that we'll talk about when we get there. Okay. Northernmost city in Israel, the name of the city together with Beersheba in the south defined the borders of the land from Dan to Beersheba. And there's this one reference, Judges 20, verse 1, Dan to Beersheba. Tel Dan was the site of many important cities from Canaanite times between 2700 to 2400 BC. So again, just like so many places, you got many layers of civilization. Springs in the area produce abundant amounts of water, forming a primary source for the upper Jordan. Talked about that. I'm going to skip over that. During the Canaanite period, the city was known by the name Leshem, Joshua 1947, and Laish, Judges 1829. Canaanite Laish was conquered and settled by Dan during the 12th century BC. And we talked about that already. Here's the reference, Judges 1829. A cultic center at Dan existed from in the time of the Judges. The children of Dan set up for themselves the graven image. As I mentioned, Jeroboam also erected an altar there and an image later on.
A long way from Jerusalem.
Long ways from Jerusalem.
So if you're supposed to go all the way to Jerusalem to worship,
yeah,
it's understandable that they had high places.
Yeah. So what happened with the division of the kingdom was the southern kingdom of Judah had Jerusalem. The northern kingdom was much bigger geographically, and so Jeroboam had two cultic centers. One in the south at Bethel, one in the north at Dan. So people anywhere in his kingdom could go to one of the two. But God had mentioned in the book of Deuteronomy that he would choose a place for his name to dwell in the midst of his people, Israel. And so the place was Jerusalem. That was where the children of Israel were supposed to go 3 times a year for the pilgrimage festivals. But yeah, Jeroboam's the whole northern kingdom was all focused on at first just idol worship, and then later the worship of the false god Baal. Yeah. The high place at Dan was established by Jeroboam I, king of Israel, in the end of the 10th century BC, after the division of the kingdom. It built altars bearing the golden calf in 2 cities, Bethel and Dan. That's from 1 Kings 12, 29 to 30. Okay. The high place at Dan was destroyed when the city was captured by Tiglath-Pileser of Assyria in 732 BC. And one of the fascinating finds from Tel Dan, discovered in 1993, this was not very long ago, is a piece of fossilized tablet from the second half of the 9th century BC. Carved into it is an inscription of an Aramaic king believed to be either Hazael or Ben-Hadad, king of Damascus, boasting his victory over the king of Israel of the house of David. And this is the first time that the name House of David was discovered outside of the Bible. Yeah. And so that is a very, very famous inscription and a very important part of the archaeological discoveries. Okay, from here, let me show you some pictures. I promise that. So here's the nature preserve at Dan along the hiking trail. And this is one of the springs there at Dan, producing just abundant water. And you can see this is not the Israel that you see in most of the travel logs. This is just a beautiful part. Reminds me very much of many places here in Northern California. That's my son David back in his early days when he had long hair. There's the spring and the water gushing out. Yeah, there's a lot of water. It's just amazing. So the high place built by Jeroboam was here on this. So there would have been a golden calf right up here on this ledge. Now we go not too far from here. Go further south and to the west. We're still in that northern portion of Israel. A tell called Tel Hazor. Tel Hazor. And many Americans will just pronounce it Hazor, but Hazor is how this is pronounced. And this is a view looking north at the citadel of the Tel. This right here is the Tel. See the sloping sides, the flat top. So you can dig down through that Tel and go into earlier and earlier civilizations. So snow-covered Mount Hermon is in the distance. See it back here? That's what we're looking at. Yeah. Hazor, southwest of Dan, north of the Sea of Galilee, located on a ridge 9.5 miles north of the Sea of Galilee, overlooking what used to be the swampy Hula Valley. Now, let me just mention the Hula Valley. In many of your Bible maps, you'll see between the Sea of Galilee and the Dead Sea another body of water, and it's labeled as Lake Hula. There never was a lake there. It was a swamp. And that when Jews started moving in the Aliyah movement to repopulate their ancient homeland, they had a problem because they wanted to settle in this area, but the swamps produced lots of mosquitoes, and the mosquitoes carried malaria. So they said, what are we going to do about this? So what they did was they planted lots and lots of eucalyptus trees. Eucalyptus trees are not native to Israel, but they're very thirsty trees. And they dried up the swamps. And they directed a lot of the water also into ponds that they made to raise fish in. So there's fish farming in the area and all these eucalyptus trees to dry up the swamps. So the swamps are no longer there. There never was a lake. And when you go through that area, you see all these fish ponds today. So we mentioned the swampy Hula Valley. So it did in biblical times overlook this swampy area. The largest tell in Israel is this one at Hazor, the largest tell, covering a total of 205 acres. And look at this, 21 layers of cities are in evidence there. And yeah.
How did they get covered up?
Okay, so here's what happens. Cities get destroyed. either by earthquake or fire or invading armies. And everything gets ruined. The rubble is laying there, and people want to build again. And they didn't have heavy earth-moving equipment like we've got today. No D8 cats in Israel in those days. So you just build on top. If it lay there for some time, dust and silt and things would fill in and give a level. So oftentimes after destruction, it would lay vacant for a long period of time. Sometimes it wouldn't lay vacant for very long before they started to build. And this causes a problem for archaeologists who now come and look at what they have. And the walls sometimes have in them stones that have secondary usage. They might have come from an earlier area. Now they're built into a more recent wall. So that's one of the issues that archaeologists have to deal with when they're trying to date things.
You would use the rubble that was there,
Like
as your foundation at least.
Yep.
You know, you would
Yep.
try to
Unless it's gotten
rock.
covered over with dirt.
Take all the rocks you couldn't build walls with it.
Yep.
Just do your natural.
Yep. That's right. So there at Hazor, there were two cities. There was an upper city and a lower city. The upper city is smaller, but still not small, 30 acres, with 21 strata of civilizations. The lower city is much larger, but only 5 strata of civilizations discovered there. It lay along that Via Maris. We talked about that major trade route connecting with Egypt. And so that was part of its importance.
And that Via Mara came down through from Syria.
Yes.
Correct?
Mm-hmm.
From Syria.
It actually originates, northern Syria, northern part of Syria. Mm-hmm.
And then it kind of follows.
Comes down and then to the Sea of Galilee, then through the Jezreel Valley, and then down along the coast. Yeah.
Are there parts of the old road showing like in Europe? We saw parts of old Roman
Mhm.
roads all through
Yep.
Switzerland and Germany
Yep.
and
Yep.
places.
Yes. There are places where you can see the old Roman roads.
That's
Yeah.
cool.
And even some places where they've seen the old Roman mile markers.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's really neat.
Yeah. Okay. So it was a Canaanite royalty, and the leader of the Northern Confederacy against Joshua, recorded in Joshua 11, 1-5. So you had all these Canaanites that got together when Joshua came into the land, and Hazor was the leader of this coalition. So there's quite an archaeological site there, quite a bit to see. In the Old Testament, Hazor was destroyed by Joshua. The Canaanite city oppressed Israel after the judgeship of Ehud. Ehud was that left-handed judge that got rid of Eglon. You remember that story? He stabbed Eglon and was so fat that the fat covered over the sword. And all the boys in Sunday school love that story. Okay, Hazor was taken by Barak, Judges 4. Army of Hazor was led by Sisera, and that's another story that all the boys in Sunday school like. When you read about Yael driving a tent peg through Sisera's temple.
That's right.
Yeah. Hazor was one of 3 chariot cities fortified by Solomon. Now, Solomon established during his reign a number of chariot cities where he had chariots and horses stationed ready to respond to any call to arms. So he had one of those chariot cities at Hazor. There was another one at Megiddo, and there were several others. And I have some materials on that that I'll share with you at some point. Hazor was one of 3 major ones. There were also, I think, about 4 others that were minor ones. At Hazor, there's a water tunnel 82 feet long, part of the water system built by Ahaz. So water was always, a big concern in all these places. How do you get enough water for all the people living in the city? And oftentimes what you had was a city and then a water source like a spring or a well and they would bring the water from that spring or well into the city by means of digging a tunnel. There's a quite remarkable one at Megiddo, and we'll probably get a chance to walk through that tunnel. And then, of course, one of the most famous is Hezekiah's tunnel in Jerusalem that you can walk through, and we'll do that. It's always kind of fun. And the water there is about thigh deep.
Sometimes it's deeper.
Sometimes it's a little deeper, yeah.
Almost drowned.
No, but sometimes we got pretty wet.
Yeah, so we saved that one for the end of the day. Okay, let's see, water tunnel. Yeah, it was destroyed by Tiglath-Pileser, recorded in 2 Kings 15. And in 144 BC, during the intertestamental period, during the time of the Maccabees, it was taken by Jonathan Maccabee after defeating the army of Demetrius II. So that was during that first Hellenistic era, the intertestamental period. There's also a city nearby called Sepphoris. Now, Sepphoris is actually almost adjacent to Nazareth. I've visited Sepphoris once. It's kind of fascinating. It's not really terribly relevant to the Bible, but it is interesting. And there's a one tradition has Joseph, Mary's husband, being not from Sepphoris, but working in Sepphoris as probably a carpenter, and Mary possibly living in Sepphoris. Might have been Sepphoris, in other words, might have been the place where Joseph and Mary met. Now, we don't know that for sure. That's just one theory.
Where is it in relation to Nazareth?
It's close to Nazareth.
North,
so,
south, east, or west? Yeah.
Well, look at point number one in the, I don't know if you have the notes, but located south central Galilee, about 4 miles northwest of Nazareth. 4 miles northwest of Nazareth. Though not mentioned in the Bible, it was one of the chief cities of Galilee until near the end of the 4th century AD. And Josephus refers to it as, quote, the ornament of all Galilee. So many, many wealthy families lived there. And as archaeologists began uncovering a lot of these old houses, they uncovered some magnificent mosaics. And one of them had this beautiful picture of a female, and she's called the Mona Lisa of the Galilee, because she looks almost like Mona Lisa. And so it's pretty certain that there were some very, very wealthy people living in Sepphoris. 55 BC, Gabinus, the proconsul of Syria, made it the district capital of Galilee. Okay, so that's 55 BC. We're still a little ways before the New Testament begins. 37 BC, coming a little closer, conquered by Herod the Great during a snowstorm. Yes, sometimes they get snow there. In 4 BC, right about the time that Jesus is being born, oddly enough, Jesus is born probably in 3 or 4 BC. How can he be born BC? And that all has to do with the confusion with the different calendars. Mm-hmm. So the Hebrew calendar, the Gregorian calendar, and so forth. So about the time of the birth of Christ, 4 BC, it was destroyed by Quintilius Varus, the legate of Syria, and the people were sold into slavery in response to a riot upon the death of Herod the Great. I don't have the date here, something BC. It was rebuilt and fortified by Herod Antipas, so it would be after 4 BC, before 0, so you get the idea. But it was rebuilt and fortified by Herod Antipas. It grew to a population of 30,000 then. And compared to Nazareth, 4 miles away, with a population probably less than 200. So it gives you an idea of the insignificance of Nazareth. Can any good thing come out of Nazareth? Mm-hmm. It was said.
Yeah.
Okay, and with its being situated so close to this beautiful, huge, ornate city, you can see why people had that view of Nazareth. Dating to the 1st century AD, there's a basilica building that covered an entire city block, 130 by 200 feet. The floor plan is much like a basilica, hence the name. A basilica has 2 rows of columns supporting a roof, giving like 3 parallel hallways. That's the basilica structure. The walls on the north and south are lined with small shops or rooms, but enter into the building, not to the exterior. Best description would be an indoor mall, but smaller in scale. The floor in the center held a large mosaic and a pool at each end. So you get an idea of what this kind of a place this was. There's a few more points about it, but I want to go right to some of these pictures. This is more on Hazor. There's an altar at Hazor. Here's the water course at Hazor, the entrance to it. Now here's Sepphoris, an aerial view, and you can see it sits up on this tell, and it's been excavated to this level, it's been excavated to lower level, and to a lower level, to well, down below you've got a road going through. But look at this magnificent mosaic found in Sepphoris. All these animals and trees, people, column. One large building, this mosaic shows festivities in Egypt when the Nile reached its peak. The lighthouse from Alexandria is seen in this mosaic. That's right up here. The Pharos is also depicted. The tower in the center of the hunting scene is a nilometer. That's here. A nilometer is a meter on the Nile to show the level of the Nile. How far has the flooding reached, which was used to measure the rise of the Nile during the inundation.
Tiny the person on top of it.
Yeah, this person. Here's the Mona Lisa that I was telling you about. So this mosaic was discovered there in Sepphoris. So it's quite interesting. Okay, now we're going to move on to Nazareth. Let's talk about Nazareth. So in Bible times, Nazareth was not much. Today, it's a great big city, very large population.
And it's part of Palestine, right?
Yeah, well, yes, Nazareth is considered, I guess, West Bank, and but it is under Israeli control.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. So Nazareth. Okay, so this is some of our review questions deal with Nazareth. It's located inside a bowl atop the Nazareth Ridge north of the Jezreel Valley, among the most southernmost limestone hills of the Lebanon Range. Okay, so you got mountains that begin up in Lebanon, they come down into Israel. It runs approximately from south-southwest to north-northeast. To the south, there's a sharp drop down to the Jezreel Valley, the plain of Esdraelon. The base of the valley is 1,214 feet above sea level. Steep hills rise up on the north and east sides, while the west side, they reach up to 1,640 feet and command an impressive view. So you can see this is why it sits down in this bowl. You've got these rising slopes. But then on one side, it drops down into the Jezreel Valley. Okay. The mild climate in the valley causes wildflowers and fruit to flourish. And although it has existed since the Canaanite period, how many times is it mentioned in the Old Testament? 0. So it was there, and we know it was there archaeologically, but no reference to it in the Old Testament. It was a completely insignificant town. It's not mentioned in the Old Testament. It's not mentioned in the Apocrypha. It's not even mentioned by Josephus or the Talmud. That's Nazareth. At the time of Christ, it was a small village, probably fewer than 200 people. Yeah. To judge by the rock tombs, the early town was higher up the West Hill than the present Nazareth. So which is interesting because you go into Nazareth and there's all these places that say, this is where, Jesus was born. This is where, Jesus went to the well. This is where this happened. This is where that happened. Probably the modern city is not actually the biblical Nazareth.
Do you think that Tizori might be closer to the biblical Nazareth?
Probably not. Yeah. There are two possible water supplies. The first, which is the larger, lies in the valley and has been called Mary's Well ever since 1100. And we can see Mary's Well. We'll probably stop and look at it. But there's no trace of early dwellings nearby. The second is a very small fountain called the New Well in an angle formed by a projection of the West Hill. The Byzantine church and town lay closer to this. So further out towards the edge of modern day Nazareth. So Nazareth was the home of Joseph, Mary, and Jesus. We have a number of references in the Gospels to that. According to John 1:45-46, that's that quote, "What good thing has ever come out of Nazareth? It was a city of disrepute." Christ returned to Nazareth on two occasions. Luke chapter 4 goes to the synagogue. He's handed the scroll of the prophet Isaiah. He opens it up to Isaiah chapter 61. And he reads half of a verse and he stops. And the eyes of all the synagogue are fixed upon him. And he says, "Today this is fulfilled." And they didn't like that, so they took him out to a brow of the city. We're going to push him over the cliff. But it wasn't his time, so he walked through the midst of them and he went on his way. Matthew 13, which is equivalent to Mark chapter 6. So we have these two occasions where Jesus returns to Nazareth. 10, the steep scarp of Jebel Kafsa overlooking the plain is traditionally called the Mount of Precipitation. And we'll probably visit this site, not because it is the site. Now, it's the traditional site where they tried to push him over the cliff. And you sit there, you look at it, and say, you can see, yeah, that could have happened here. But it's too far away from the actual New Testament city of Nazareth to be that. But it is a wonderful site where you can look out over the whole Jezreel Valley, and you can look across at Megiddo on the other side. So it's a beautiful place to think about this event of them wanting to cast Jesus down off the cliff, but also a wonderful panoramic view. And when we get to the other side and go up on Mount Carmel, thank you, there's another place where we get a beautiful panoramic view of the whole Jezreel Valley from the other side. Okay, and so that's the steep scarp of Jebel Kafsa. So not the hill on which their city was built, Luke 4:29. Today, Nazareth is home to, notice this, more than 60,000 Israeli Arabs. Excuse me, it's not part of the West Bank. It is part of, it is Arab Israel, Israeli Arab. So these Arabs, most of them are citizens of Israel. They can vote in Israeli elections. They can run for public office. And yeah, they're Israeli Arabs. And there is another Nazareth, Upper Nazareth, just adjacent to it, which is home to thousands of Jewish residents. And it's much newer than the older Nazareth. The majority of Nazareths are Palestinian Arabs, about 35 to 40% of which are Christians, and the rest are Muslims. The Israeli government built a new city in the 50s called Nazrat Illit, Upper Nazareth. That's the same Upper Nazareth we were just talking about up here. And populated it with a Jewish majority. Nazareth has, as you might expect, many churches in it. And some of the famous churches are the Basilica of the Annunciation, where traditionally it is said this is where the angel made his announcement to Mary. They built a church over it. So there is a Byzantine church in Nazareth that was built in 427. Later, it was rebuilt by the Crusaders, probably around 1000 roughly. Today, the present church was built in 1959 and redone in 1969. It's the largest church in the Middle East. So we have the Basilica of Jesus the Youth. We have the Chapel of Our Lady, the Fright. We have Mary's Well and a church built there. This is traditionally where Gabriel spoke to Mary. St. Gabriel's Church of the Annunciation is there, which is a Greek Orthodox church. It was rebuilt by the Crusaders, rebuilt again in 1769. There's Mensa Christi, St. Joseph's Church, Greek Catholic Church, synagogue, Greek Catholic Synagogue Church, built in the 6th century, and then the Ladies of Nazareth Convent. So all these churches. So it's a, quote, Christian, very heavily Christian influence there. So there have been a lot of conflicts in recent days between the Arabs and the Christians. There actually is a strong movement right in Nazareth of Palestinian Christians who are saying, we want to support the state of Israel. And that's just been a recent thing in the last decade or two. Okay, so that's Nazareth. Let's take a look at some pictures. Here's an aerial view. Okay. Yeah, you can see it. It's a huge city.
What is the population today? 60.
Okay, here's the Church of the Annunciation with this kind of sharp point to it. And in the Church of the Annunciation, this is the sacred grotto associated with the Annunciation by the angel Gabriel to Mary, that she would bear the Messiah. And so there's an altar there in the grotto. The words inscribed on it, not clearly visible, state in Latin, here the word was made flesh. Mm-hmm. So is this the actual site? Probably not, but it's there and it commemorates the event. Okay, and Mary's Well is another place where they say the announcement was made to Mary. And it's not, it's close by, but it's not in the exact same spot. These days, there's been a lot of vandalism and graffiti at Mary's Well by Arab Muslims.
What had happened by them? What did you say?
I'm sorry?
Graffiti?
Yeah, graffiti and vandalism. Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of trash around there. It's kind of disappointing. Okay. Okay, next we're going to move across the Jezreel Valley from Nazareth to the other side of the Jezreel Valley, to the west side of the valley. Talk about Megiddo. We still got to get to Jerusalem. We'll get there. But we do need to talk about Megiddo. So located on the lower slope of Mount Carmel. Basically what happens is Mount Carmel juts out into the Mediterranean, and it goes to the south and east diagonally. And it starts up high, and as it comes in towards the Jezreel Valley, it gets lower and lower and lower and lower. And down at the very end, then there's this mound, which is a tell, which is Megiddo. So it's almost like an extension of Mount Carmel. So described here as located on the lower slope of Mount Carmel, 18 miles south-southeast of Haifa, overlooking the Jezreel Valley. So I don't know exactly what was there, originally. It is a tell. It's got all these layers. There may have been a slight bump to start with. I suspect that's the case. Nobody's really excavated that low down to tell, but that's probably, it was the high ground overlooking the valley, and so that was a good place to occupy. But then it got destroyed and rebuilt, destroyed and rebuilt, destroyed and rebuilt, destroyed and rebuilt. The tell has about 30 strata of civilizations. Wow. That's amazing. Now, we talked about water tunnels. At Megiddo, there's a water tunnel 210 feet long to bring water from a spring into the city so that they can have water in there. And that's quite an amazing tunnel to walk through. Megiddo was mentioned in Egyptian records in the campaign of Thutmose III and Amenhotep II, and also in the famous Amarna letters. So the Amarna letters were a rich treasure trove of letters discovered in Amarna, Egypt, detailing Egypt's correspondence chiefly with the Hittites up in Asia Minor but also with other civilizations. And Megiddo is mentioned in those letters. Okay, so a bunch of references in the Bible to Megiddo. The king of Megiddo was killed by Joshua when they first invaded the land, Joshua chapter 12. Megiddo was given to the tribe of Manasseh. Manasseh, one of Joseph's two sons. Okay. The Canaanites retained control of it. It was involved in the defeat of Sisera. It was in the 5th Solomonic district. And here we have these chariot cities mentioned again. It was one of the 3 fortified chariot cities of Solomon. Again, there were more than 3, but there are 3 principal ones. Megiddo and Hazor were 2 of them. Now, Ahaziah died in the valley after being smitten by King Jehu. Josiah, the king, was killed there. That's one of the review questions. And that's referenced in 2 Kings 23 and 2 Chronicles 35. And also is, you find a backwards look at that from Zechariah chapter 12. But the godly King Josiah, Josiah was one of the great kings of the southern kingdom. But he got a little too full of himself, thought he could take on the Pharaoh, and went to battle against Pharaoh and ended up dying. Megiddo is associated with the final apocalyptic battle. And we have a book over here, Revelation 16, verses 12 to 16, Armageddon. So I just need to mention Armageddon. The Megiddon part is Megiddo. AR on the front of it comes from the Hebrew word har. Har with an H on the front of it. Har means mountain. So Harmageddon means the mountain of Megiddo. So when the Bible talks about the valley of Armageddon, it's the valley associated with Mount Megiddo, which would be the Jezreel Valley. Okay. So in Greek, the H is not pronounced. So Har Megiddon becomes Armageddon. Armageddon. So Har Megiddo. That's what we have in Revelation 16. Okay, Bet She'an. I'm going to, how much time have we got? I think I'm going to have to skip over a lot of Bet She'an. Bet She'an was where the bodies of Saul and his sons were hung after they were killed by the Philistines. And then they were rescued and taken and given a decent, well, they burned them actually, but Armageddon is, to look at a map of this land, here you see Megiddo right here. This is Israel. Here's the Mediterranean out here. Megiddo right here. So Abraham comes out of Ur of the Chaldeans over here. Comes to Haran. From Haran, he goes down to Egypt. This route here was a major travel route, which joins up then with the Via Maris down in here, from Megiddo down. Okay. But this was the route basically from Mesopotamia. So when it gets joined by a route from up here in Anatolia, they both join together. So really 2 directions join together and end up coming right down through that Jezreel Valley. And Megiddo is on the high ground overlooking this valley. So armies frequently marched through that valley, either Mesopotamia coming against Egypt, Mesopotamia coming against Anatolia, Anatolia coming against Egypt, Anatolia coming against Mesopotamia, or the other direction. Everybody's marching through this valley. And this is why it is known as a place of battles, of warfare.
So they followed water probably.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yep.
Just like the old Oregon Trail.
Yep.
Or followed Snake River.
Yep.
In the same way they, if you were going to go from Babylon to Jerusalem, you weren't going to go across the desert.
You couldn't go across the desert because it would be too long without water. You would survive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So from Egypt north, so all these arrows are pointing to Megiddo. Come up from the south, come down from Anatolia. Everything's pointing at Megiddo. This is where these battles are all fought. So this is an aerial view of the Tell. You can see there's been a trench dug here as they were digging down to civilizations. Up here are more recent civilizations. You see all these buildings that have been excavated. You see more trench building here. So it's an incredible sight. This is a Canaanite altar going back to Canaanite times. This is a person lying down in the middle of it, so you get a sense of how big that altar is. Yeah.
I wouldn't get anywhere near that.
Huh?
I wouldn't get anywhere near that.
Yeah. Okay, so we talked about that long tunnel. Here's the spring outside the city, and there's a little bit of water in it in this picture. Sometimes it's got more, but this could bring water. You could go down to the spring through this tunnel, be protected from any enemies, and safely carry your water back home. Here's a picture of the tunnel. Now, this walkway, of course, wasn't in biblical times, but that's there for our sakes today. And we can walk through this tunnel all the way down to the water source. This is going down into the shaft from inside the city. These stairways are modern too, but there were old stairs. You can see parts of them in places where you have to go down a long ways till you get down to the proper level. Then you go down through this tunnel to get to the spring. It's in Megiddo, a huge silo for storage of grain. We mentioned that Solomon had a chariot city there. You got to feed all those horses. So there was a big grain silo. And you see these steps going down here. There are steps just like this, 180 degrees opposite. And what they would do is lay a board across. And then as the grain got lower, they could just lower the board. And so you could go down the steps and walk in on the board and fill up your bucket or whatever, and then carry it back up the steps. Another really important archaeological find at Megiddo now was the seal of Jeroboam II. So Jeroboam II, one of the kings of Israel, this was discovered there at Megiddo, and it's the earliest such seal ever found. So Paleo-Hebrew script here has Jeroboam's name on it.
Is that like out of brass or something? Do you
I'm
know?
not sure. It looks brass, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah. Now, that might just be the lighting. I'm not sure. Okay. Bet Shean is an amazing site. It was standing in Jesus's day. There's no record of Jesus ever having visited Bet Shean. It was an important city, however, but it was a Greek city. It was the westernmost city in what's known as the Decapolis. In New Testament times, Decapolis. Deca means 10, polis, Greek word for city. So the Decapolis had 10 cities, most of them on the east side of the Jordan. This was the westernmost city, the Decapolis, and they were Greek cities, and so there weren't Jews really living in them. And that's probably why it's not mentioned in the New Testament. But Bet Shean is mentioned in the Old Testament. Like I said, Saul and his sons were hung on the walls of Bet Shean. Now you can see from this picture the city of Bet Shean down here. This main road here is the main roadway through the center of town. Then just behind it, there is another city up on top. This is the Acropolis.
Doesn't tell that whole no.
Well, it looks like a tell. It's got the characteristic shape of a tell, but it was also the whole thing is not a tell. It was an acropolis, and that's the Old Testament city. The Old Testament city, and so where Saul and his sons were hung were on the city walls here. And this was also became a capital of the Egyptian settlement in Old Testament times, and the Egyptian governor's palace essentially is up here, and there are remnants of that you can see today. Some very well preserved remnants. But here's some sheep grazing around Beit Shean.
Would you say there's like a temple to Zeus or something up there?
No, no.
Greek temples.
On the Acropolis, what you have mainly, what you can see today is from the Egyptian era.
Okay.
But it was a Philistine city at the time that Saul was killed. So in the lower part, which was the Greek city, these are some of the ancient columns that are still left there. They were all on the ground. They've been stood up, but they were found in place. Okay, I thought I had some more pictures of Beit Shean, but I do need to move on because I want to get to Jerusalem. There's a lot to say about Jerusalem. We've got about half an hour. So let's talk about the city of Jerusalem now. So if you think about the geology and the geography of Jerusalem, you could think of it as consisting of 3 valleys and 2 hills. So we're looking at it, we're looking from the south towards the north, this picture. You have the Kidron Valley. The Kidron Valley is a fairly deep valley, and rising on the other side of Kidron is the Mount of Olives. The Mount of Olives is not part of Jerusalem, it's separate from Jerusalem, separated by the Kidron Valley. A second valley is over here, the Tyropoeon Valley. And between these lies this mountain. This mountain in Old Testament times was known as Mount Zion. And at the height of Mount Zion is the Temple Mount. This was the threshing floor of Aravna the Jebusite that David purchased during the judgment of God against Israel's people, where that plague was stopped. And so the temple eventually gets built here. The lower part of it was where David had his city, called the City of David. This was also the city called Salem. Salem, and the king of Salem was Melchizedek back in Abraham's day. There are various names for this. We'll talk about that in a moment. But the Kidron Valley, the Tyropoeon Valley. Now there's a third valley, the Valley of Hinnom, running down here. So this is Gay, which is the Hebrew word for valley. Gay Ben Hinnom, the valley of the son of Hinnom. And this was the garbage pit of Jerusalem. This is where they took all their garbage and dumped it, and where animal carcasses were thrown. And because of that, they had maggots that were eating these carcasses, and it was smelly. And when Jesus talked about Gehenna, this is Ge Hinnom, the valley of Hinnom, where their worm dieth not. And it becomes symbolic of hell because there were fires burning. They're constantly trying to burn up all this trash. Yeah. That's the Valley of Hinnom. And so between the Valley of Hinnom and the Tyropoeon Valley, there's another hill, which was not part of the original Jerusalem. But as the city expanded, chiefly in the day of Hezekiah, the city had to expand westward. Now, at some point, we think this was probably during the Crusader period, it might have been earlier, this western hill here was identified as Mount Zion, mistakenly. So the biblical Mount Zion is way over here, where the Temple Mount is. Okay. But if you go to Jerusalem today and you ask somebody, where is Mount Zion? They'll point to the western hill that's known as Mount Zion. And this green wall here, these are the old city walls. It's known as the old city walls that you see today. But the original city was down here, the southeastern hill, Mount Zion. So there's a lot of confusion about places. And before we go any further on this, I want to come to our notes. Jerusalem. Okay, so it's set high in the hills of Judea, about 31 miles from the Mediterranean and over 18 miles west of the north end of the Dead Sea. So if you go from the very north end of the Dead Sea, from your direction this way, west towards the Mediterranean, you'll run right through Jerusalem. Okay. Geography. Okay, 3 valleys. We just talked about this. The Kidron Valley on the east side of the city, running north and south, continuing far south and east of the city, eventually emptying into the Dead Sea. The Valley of Ben Hinnom, or simply Hinnom Valley, or Gehenna, running along the east and south sides of the city, terminating where it joins the Kidron Valley at the southeast corner. And then in between those two, the Tyropoeon Valley, running from north to south. Today, the Tyropoeon Valley is basically filled in. You can't see a valley there anymore. But it runs along where the Western Wall, or sometimes called the Wailing Wall, we'll talk about momentarily. Today, this valley, mostly filled in within the old city walls, but it's visible where it exits just outside the Dung Gate. Okay, 2 hills. Okay, we mentioned these. There's the eastern hill between the Kidron and the Tyropoeon Valley. So the southern extension of this valley was the original Jebus, or Mount Zion, also known as the City of David. Okay, so Jerusalem, it's got these different names. Okay, it was called Salem, which is related to the word Shalom, the city of peace. When it was taken over by the Jebusites, one of the Canaanite tribes, being the humble people they were, they renamed it after themselves. It's called Jebus, after the Jebusites. And then later on, it was restored the original name of Salem, but with an addition to it, Yerushalem, Jerusalem. All 3 of those names describe the same city, nestled in between the Tyropoeon Valley and the Kidron Valley. And it was also known as the City of David. So Jerusalem is the City of David. Now, we just had the Christmas season, and everybody knows that Bethlehem is the City of David because it's called that in the Gospels. But in the Old Testament, the City of David refers time and time and time again to Jerusalem. And it's called the City of David because David was the one who conquered it from the Canaanites and made it his capital. So it's called the City of David. It's only once referred to as City of David, only once refers to Bethlehem. But there are many, many references to the City of David as Jerusalem. In Solomon's time, the temple was built on the northern extension of the hill. At this time, this northern extension became known as Mount Zion. Mount Zion. So that's the proper biblical Mount Zion, where the temple stood. Now, the western hill we were just talking about, between the valley of Ben Hinnom and the Tyropoeon Valley, it is not certain when the city of Jerusalem first expanded to this hill, but certainly post-exilic Jerusalem, Second Temple period, we think probably earlier in the time of Zekiah, maybe even earlier, but certainly in the post-exilic times, eventually extended its walls to take in this hill. By the 1st century, the city walls extended all the way to the edge of the valley of Ben Hinnom, and this western hill eventually came to be known as Mount Zion, which is its name today. We think, this is a theory, we don't know this for sure, but we think what happened was the Crusaders came in. They wanted to reclaim the holy city from the Muslims, and they were trying to locate holy places. and they asked somebody, where is Mount Zion? And somebody said, well, for 5 shekels, I'll show you. And so for 5 shekels, the guy said, it's right there. And the Crusaders accepted that and erected buildings and called it Mount Zion, and it's been known as that ever since. But it's not the biblical Mount Zion. Yeah.
Where was the sacrifice of Isaac?
That was, the biblical Mount Zion.
Right.
Yeah.
Would that be where the Temple Mount is?
Yeah, that's where Temple Mount is. Yeah. So the Mount of Olives lies to the east of the Kidron Valley and was technically not part of the city of Jerusalem. Was there another question? Yeah.
Say was the Dome of the rock supposed to be the rock where Abraham slept? Isaac?
Yeah. Under the Dome of the Rock today, that golden dome you see on the Temple Mount is what's known as the foundation stone. So it's a rock that juts up through the surrounding pavement. And interestingly, there is a platform. It's limestone, so it's fairly easy to carve. It's got a lot of carvings in it, but it's got one place that is carved out flat that has the exact dimensions of the Ark of the Covenant. And we think that's where the Ark of the Covenant rested. And the temple was located right there. That's the same place where Abraham offered his son Isaac. It's known in Hebrew literature as the foundation stone, because it's held to be the foundation of the whole world. In Genesis, it says that God created Adam, and it says he planted the garden eastward in Eden. And we know the Tigris and the Euphrates were 2 rivers that flowed out of Eden. Today, the Tigris and the Euphrates come together in Iraq, which is east of Jerusalem. So it seems to fit that Adam was actually created on the Temple Mount. Then eastward from there, God creates the Garden of Eden and places Adam into the garden. So at any rate, that's held to be the place where Adam was created. It's the center of the world, the foundation of the world, the place where Abraham sacrificed Isaac, and then where the temple was built. We used to be able to go into the Dome of the Rock years and years ago. We can't go in anymore. Tourists are not allowed inside. But I wish we could go in and show you that temple, that foundation stone. But there are pictures. There's lots of good pictures of it that you can see.
Dr. Gunn, quick question. So when the disciples were told by Jesus that not a stone would be left,
yeah,
and yet there still is the Wailing Wall, which I understand to be a reinforcement or something.
Yeah.
How about the rest of this stuff?
Yeah. All the stones of the temple were thrown down. Every one of them. And you can see them still. They're lying there at the base of the western wall. The walls of the Temple Mount itself were not the temple. Those are retaining walls. So the way that was done, the way the construction was made, since it's built on top of a mountain, today we'd move in big earth moving equipment and level out a level spot, build on top of it. But in biblical times, what they did was they went out a ways down the slopes of the mountain and built retaining walls, and then would fill in order to create a flat space. So those walls, the western wall, the Wailing Wall, and the walls around the Temple Mount today are all just part of that retaining wall. That's part of the structure beneath the temple. But the temple itself was completely thrown down. There are, interestingly enough, on the Temple Mount, to this day, there are some very, very old wooden beams that they think were part of the Second Temple. And they were in storage, and just not too long ago, the Arabs kind of hauled them out, and they're just out in the open. The Jews are trying to plan on storing them again in a safe spot, but there's all kinds of politics involved that are pretty ridiculous. So anyway, does that answer your question about the stones?
Yes, it did. Which direction is north?
Well, the Temple Mount runs north and south, and the temple itself is north of the city of David.
Okay.
Yeah, Teresa.
So do they believe the ark is still there? The Ark of the Covenant?
Wait, you're getting into a big,
Okay.
complicated issue. There's all kinds of theories about where the ark
Yeah.
might be. One theory is that it lies underneath the Temple Mount in a cave. And then there are others that think it's somewhere else.
I find that sort of insulting. That it may be under that dome.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. The mount, okay. Water source. Okay, the only dependable natural water source for the ancient city of Jerusalem is the Gihon Spring. So from the Temple Mount or from the city of David, you go eastward down into the Kidron Valley, and in the slopes of the Kidron Valley, near the bottom of the valley, is a spring called Gihon Spring, and it produces quite a bit of water, actually. Okay, Old City versus the biblical city. So the Old City in quote marks. When you go to Jerusalem today, you see these walls. Those walls are the walls of the Old City. And when you visit Jerusalem, you go through the Old City. You see the Via Dolorosa in the Old City, and all these markets in the Old City. Okay, that wall around what's known as Old City in quote marks was constructed in 1538 by the Ottomans. Okay, so it's old. Yes, it's old to us, 1538. That was a long time ago. It's older than our country, but not old by biblical standards. Okay. So during the reign of the Ottoman ruler Suleiman I, that's the present day Jerusalem, the area inside the wall is roughly divided into quadrants named for their former dominant ethnic communities. So there are these different quarters. There's a Muslim quarter, a Jewish quarter, Christian quarter, and an Armenian quarter. Armenians are also a Christian, so there are two Christian quarters. Christian quarter and the Armenian. The Christian, so-called Christian quarter is pretty much Roman Catholic. The Armenian is more Eastern Orthodox, Armenian Orthodox Christian. And there's a Jewish quarter and a Muslim quarter. There's also an Arab market in the Old City, quote marks, called the Souk. And it lines the main axis of the Old City. It's a fascinating place to visit. Now, that's the so-called Old City. Let's talk about the biblical city. Okay, the biblical city of Jerusalem lies largely outside into the south of the Old City. So you might call this the older Old City, okay, or the original Old City. But most of it isn't even in the Old City. So when you go to the Old City of Jerusalem, you're really not looking at biblical Jerusalem, or at least not Old Testament Jerusalem. So at the time of Herod the Great, the city walls expanded both to the north and the west to encompass much of the area presently enclosed by these 16th century walls. It's most, but not all of it. Things have changed a lot at different stages of the history. Excluding the northwest section of the Christian quarter, which contains the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and the northeast section of the Muslim quarter. So the Temple Mount now, the Hebrew name for it is Har, there's that word mountain again, like in Armageddon, Har Habayit. Bayit is the Hebrew word for a house, and Habayit is the house. This is the mountain of the house. And the house here is a reference to the house of the Lord's house. So in Arab, it's called Al-Haram Al-Sharif, noble sanctuary, referring to the Al-Aqsa Mosque. The Al-Aqsa Mosque, by the way, is not the Dome of the Rock. The Dome of the Rock is not a mosque. It is a memorial. The mosque on the Temple Mount is at the southern end of Temple Mount, and it's called Al-Aqsa. A lot of confusion over that. Today, many of the Muslims are claiming the entire Temple Mount as Al-Aqsa Mosque. But the mosque itself is actually at the south end. And they only recently started calling the whole thing Al-Aqsa Mosque. Okay, so the Temple Mount was included in the biblical city during the time of Solomon and has always remained part of the city of Jerusalem at all subsequent stages. So Temple Mount itself is inside the, quote, old city walls. So if you're down in the city of David, you're outside the city walls. You can walk north and go through what's called the Dung Gate, and you're right there by the Temple Mount. So it's don't be fooled by the phrase old city. Okay, we've got quite an extensive history here that I'm just going to have to catch you up on next week because we're almost out of time. But I think we'll pick up here next time and we'll talk a little bit about Jerusalem at the beginning of next week's section. But let me take you through some of these pictures. We talked about this geography with these 2 hills, 3 valleys. Okay, that's important to keep in mind. There's the Kidron Valley, Tyropoeon Valley, and the Hinnom Valley. So it's like 3 fingers, almost like your index finger and the middle finger and your thumb. And you can use that as a symbolic representation of the city of Jerusalem. So there's the actual city of David, and then the western hill would be in this region. Okay, here is down here at the bottom, this is the city of Jebus. Okay, Jebusites, also Salem in Melchizedek's day. It had a valley gate, had a north gate, a water gate, fountain gate down here. You read about these gates at various times in the Old Testament. That's all outside of this old city wall up here on the north. From Solomon to Hezekiah, you have expansion to the north and to the west. Still most of this outside of the old city walls. But this is Old Testament before the Babylonian captivity. You have this kind of expansion. And then on return from Babylonian captivity, at the time of Nehemiah, when the city walls are rebuilt, it's these dark walls here. So again, mostly outside, some portion of it inside today's old city walls. At the time of Herod the Great now, it's the dark city walls. And notice up here in the northwest corner, that's none of that was inside the city walls. Here in the northwest corner, that was outside of the city walls. The rest of this part of it down here is outside of the old city walls. So it's changed from time to time. But this was Jerusalem at the time of Herod the Great, at the time that Jesus was there. So here it is today. The old city walls are like this. City of David down below it outside. Temple Mount up here. You've got a Muslim quarter up here, Christian quarter over here, Armenian quarter down here, and a Jewish quarter right over here, as you might suspect, close to the Temple Mount and the Western Wall. Yes, question?
Where's our hotel?
Okay, so right up here on the north side, this right here is the Damascus Gate, where I'm circling, okay? From the Damascus Gate, you go across the street and you walk up, 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 up. Here's the Garden Tomb. It's off this map, but it's up here within walking distance.
Okay. What's the name of that one?
It's called the Ambassador Hotel.
Oh, okay.
Called the Ambassador Hotel. Yeah, question.
I noticed so the map of where it had Solomon's temple and over to Herod's, we don't have like Solomon's house on there anymore. Was that completely destroyed the same time temple was destroyed?
Yeah.
Okay.
We don't have Solomon's temple. We think we have located David's palace.
Okay.
A very famous archaeologist who died just a few years ago, Eilat Mazar. Her grandfather, Benjamin Mazar, was a very famous Israeli archaeologist. She followed in his footsteps, and she did a lot of excavation in the city of David, and discovered really what is the palace of King David. Yeah. Okay, well we gotta quit,
I discovered.
and we'll try to catch up a little bit more on Jerusalem next time.
Thank you.
You are welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Gunn.
You're welcome. God bless you. And Lord willing, we'll see you all next week. I was going to take a head count tonight of who needed transportation. Be ready next week. Let's see who needs transportation to the airport. I want to get that all settled. But we do have apparently from Grace Baptist Church a 10-passenger van.
Expect it to be 9 passengers, I would say.
Okay.
Yeah.
9.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. So
Need to make sure.
their van that can go down and a pickup truck. So we'll try to get that. But everybody has their own transportation already figured out. Let me know that so I know how many we need to transport from here from Reading.
How many of us are going?
21 in all. 21 in
Counting
all.
you?
What?
Counting you?
Counting me. Yes, counting me
And you?
and Pastor John from Grace Baptist.
21 and all.
Yeah, 21 in all, but that also includes Kathleen, who's going from Bangladesh. So she won't be on our flight. And I think we have a couple of other people on a different flight. So we'll have to get that all figured out. All right.
Can I ask the names of the other 2 hotels, the one in Tiberias and the one in